A game made for everyone is a game made for no one. It is a common saying in design, a warning against creating something so broad, so unfocused, that it fails to connect deeply with any particular audience. For a few years, Genshin Impact has felt like the exception that proves that rule. It has masterfully balanced the desires of the casual explorer, the lore enthusiast, and the character collectors, creating a world that truly did feel like it was almost for everyone. But beneath that success, there has always been a persistent request from its most dedicated players for something more, something made just for them, a true challenging permanent endgame. With the arrival of Stygian Onslaught, that request was, on paper, finally been answered. Hoyoverse has created content not for everyone, but for a very specific slice of their player base. And yet, the resulting firestorm of criticism suggests a profound irony. In trying to make a mode for someone, they may have created an experience that has ended up satisfying almost no one. It has become a lightning rod for a much bigger, more difficult conversation about who this game is truly for. Let's get into it. First of all, let's talk about Stygian Onslaught. Before we get into the community reaction or the design philosophy behind it, it is important that we are all on the same page about what this mode actually is. On paper, it is the new permanent endgame content players have been asking for, a challenging game mode, separate from both the Spiral Abyss and the Imaginarium Theater. But the execution here is built on a few key pillars that fundamentally change how you approach it. First, and perhaps most importantly, you begin every fight with zero energy. This single choice immediately disrupts the rhythm of combat that players have mastered over the last 5 years. Any team that relies on a powerful opening, a Bennett ult or a whatever buffers ult, right, is instantly on the back foot. It creates a new kind of friction, where the value of battery characters and energy generating weapons like the Favonia series is no longer just a suggestion for comfort, it is a near necessity to even get your team functioning within the tight time limits. And the logical extension of this, one of the most significant hidden costs, is the gear requirement. It implies that your perfect artifact set, the one with massive crit stats you spent months farming, is now potentially suboptimal if it lacks energy recharge. It pushes players toward needing a second wardrobe, an entirely separate high ER build for their characters just for this mode. This isn't just a simple strategy change, it is a new massive resource sink designed to send you right back into the artifact grind. And all of this demanding artifact management in a game that after 5 years still doesn't have a properly working loadout system. Wow! And then there's the roster requirement. As you climb into the higher difficulties, the mode demands that you field 3 distinct teams. That is 12 characters in total. And to ensure that you can't just shuffle your best gear around, once you lock a team for a fight, their characters, weapons, and artifacts are all frozen in place. That one perfect artifact set you spent months farming for, it can only be in one place, on one character, for one fight. The mode isn't just testing the strength of your best team, it is testing the depth of your entire account. It is a war of attrition as much as it is a battle of skill. And finally, there is the matter of co-op. You can play with friends to a point. The lower difficulties are open to matchmaking, but the rewards that the most dedicated players are actually chasing, the artifact reroll materials, the weapon skins from the highest tiers, those are locked behind solo-only clears. The mode effectively tells you that when the real challenge begins, you are on your own. So that is the foundation we are working with, a mode that demands a wide, deep, and self-sufficient roster, all while fighting against a constant energy deficit. But these are just the rules of engagement. To understand the real nature of the challenge and why it has been so controversial, we have to look at the opponents themselves. And when we do look at those opponents, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. This isn't just hard content for the sake of being hard. It is a series of specific locks, each designed to be opened by a very specific key. To understand what that means, let's look at the bosses from the initial rotation one by one. First, you have the Hydro Tulpa. The lock here is straightforward. It is permanently immune to hydro damage, and it constantly summons smaller version of itself. If it absorbs them, it heals a significant portion of its health. The intended solution becomes obvious very quickly. You need a high uptime pyro DPS character to consistently trigger Vaporize and burn through its health bar. Characters like Arlecchino are strong, and the more recently released Mavuika feels especially positioned as the optimal answer. Other teams can work, for example Xiangding, but the path of least resistance is intentionally narrowed. Next, you face the Lava Dragon statue. This boss introduces a mechanic where, for most of the fight, it is functionally invulnerable. The only way to make it take meaningful damage is to apply pyro to it. Applying other elements like hydro or cryo can actually be detrimental, prolonging its invulnerable phase Phase. It is a boss that essentially tells you to fight fire with more fire. This design naturally funnels you directly into burning teams, featuring characters like 𝗖𝗍 or Emily, or specific overload teams. Once again, a very particular problem with a very particular solution. And finally, it begins the fight with what can only be described as comical levels of damage resistance, around 270%. The only way to lower this shield is through repeated high-frequency cryo attacks. And who happens to be the perfect character for delivering that kind of damage?
Who's that Pokemon?
Skirk! Her kit doesn't just feel good here, it feels like it was designed for this exact encounter. The synergy is a little too perfect to be a coincidence. So when you look at all three bosses together, the pattern is undeniable. This design philosophy doesn't just encourage variety, it actively devalues a significant portion of the game's 5-year roster. It creates an environment where the most efficient and sometimes only viable path forward is to use the characters that have been featured on the most recent banners. And it's this feeling, the feeling of being funneled toward a specific solution, that directly ties into the next major point of friction, the rewards you get for walking that path. Because this is where the controversy stops being about the game's mechanics and starts being about something else entirely, a fundamental question of respect. For all the discussion about team compositions and inflated health pools, the single element that has generated the most unified backlash is the decision to make the pinnacle rewards temporary. In almost any game, a hard-earned cosmetic reward serves a specific purpose. It is a trophy. It is a permanent marker of an achievement, a story you can tell just by having it equipped. It says, I was here and I overcame this. In its own way, it is a form of respect the game pays to the player for their dedication and mastery. An expiring weapon skin, on the other hand, is not a trophy, it is a rental. It communicates that your achievement, your effort, your late night theory crafting and team building, the resources you invested into your characters, all of it has a shelf life. All of it has an expiration date. The pinnacle of your effort from this patch will be gone in the next. What this does is transform a one-time aspirational goal into a reoccurring chore. It is no longer about climbing the mountain and planting a flag. It is about climbing a mountain, planting a flag, and then being told that you have to come back and do it all over again in 40 days, or the flag disappears. And that is why this feels so inherently disrespectful to so many. It devalues the very investment that the game itself demands. You are encouraged to spend your time, your resources, and in many cases, your money to build a roster capable of clearing these challenges. You walk that narrow path the designers laid out for you, only to find that the prize at the end dissolves in your hands. It is a system that seems almost perfectly designed to create frustration, and yet there are those in the community who defend this approach. To understand the full picture, it is important that we address those arguments directly, because to understand the full scope of the situation, we need to understand the perspective of those who see this mode as a positive, or at least an acceptable addition. The first one, and perhaps the most understandable argument, is that this content isn't meant for everyone. The endgame is only meant for those who sweat. It is a playground for the whales.
That's so sad about gacha games. It has nothing to do with long-term players or skill until now, at least. He was your friend in Genshin, not anymore. Bro, this is such a shit take. What? Huh? Seriously, you're such a bullshitter, dude. Oh my god, it's not about the skill that you have and it's about the money you put in now for looking cool. Shut the fuck up, you little bitch. Jesus Christ. Let whales have one thing, you know? Dude, you get all the resources free to play. And then you don't get one fucking thing, and only whales get the one fucking thing. Shut the fuck up.
Metí entre la piedra de Chipiona del faro. Y cuando entro en el restaurante me ve el
No, at the time, no, you sound like a little bitch. Let whales get one thing. One.
Oh, boo-hoo. Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
a true test for players whose investments have made every other piece of content in the game trivial. And from that very narrow perspective, it is not entirely wrong. They did need something to do. The problem is that this defends a philosophy of exclusionary design. A healthy endgame should offer aspirational goals for the majority, not a private playground for the top 0.1%. When the ultimate challenge is functionally inaccessible to nearly the entire player base, it stops being an aspirational goal and it becomes a wall. This leads directly into the next defense, that it's all just optional content. The argument is that since the best rewards are just cosmetics, you can simply ignore the game mode if it's too hard or if you don't like it. But this fundamentally misunderstands why people play games like this long term. Aspirational content is a core driver of engagement. Players want to conquer the game's toughest challenges. To be told to simply ignore the pinnacle of endgame content is dismissive. Moreover, the design of this supposedly optional content is a signal of the game's future trajectory, and that affects everyone's confidence, whether they attempt it or not. Then there is the familiar refrain: this is just how gacha games work. The idea that creating problems and then selling the solutions is just the standard business model, and that players should simply expect it. This is an argument rooted in cynicism. It excuses predatory design by labeling it as normal. For years, Genshin has cultivated an image of being a more accessible gacha that sets itself apart. This defense advocates for abandoning that standard and accepting a more aggressive model simply because other games do it. It is an argument against demanding better, and you know that's just not good, isn't it? And finally, we arrive at the most creative defense: the argument that temporary rewards are actually a good thing. The theory goes that since the skin isn't permanent, it reduces the FOMO for players who can't get it. It's just a seasonal flex, a temporary badge of honor. This is a fundamental misreading of player psychology. It is an attempt to find a silver lining in a system that feels inherently disrespectful. The anxiety from a perpetual reoccurring task just to maintain a fleeting status is far greater than a one-time disappointment of missing a permanent item. This isn't reducing FOMO, it is replacing it with a hamster wheel. So when you look at these defenses together, you see a pattern. They either require you to ignore the experience, or the vast majority of players, or to simply accept a new, more aggressive status quo for the game. And that is why we have to zoom out, because this isn't just about one mode or one bad reward. It is about where the game has been heading for a very long time. Stygian Onslaught, for all of its flaws, isn't an anomaly. It feels more like a destination. This design didn't appear in a vacuum. It is the result of a slow, methodical 5-year evolution of the game's relationship with power, difficulty, and monetization. Let's recall the official justification given for years for the lack of a challenging permanent endgame. It was a desire to avoid causing player anxiety. Now, let's hold that thought and look at the system that has now been implemented. A hyper-restrictive time DPS check, where the pinnacle rewards expire every 40 days, creating a perpetual cycle of needing to re-clear the hardest content. A system that heavily incentivizes spending on new characters just to keep up. The irony is palpable. The system they have created is arguably a far greater source of anxiety and pressure than any traditional permanent endgame could ever have been. And it creates what many see as the core design loop, now in its most transparent form. First, you create a very specific artificial problem. A boss that is only vulnerable to a niche damage type, or a shield that only breaks with a specific element. And then second, you sell the direct tailor-made solution. You release a new premium character whose kit is the perfect key for that specific lock. And third, you ensure the rewards for engaging with this system is fleeting. A temporary skin, an expiring title. This ensures the player's satisfaction is also temporary, meaning they can never truly feel done. It forces them right back into step one with the next patch, the next rotation, the next problem. Stygian Onslaught is simply the most blatant and unapologetic implementation of this philosophy we have seen to date. It is the system stripped down to its bare essentials. We have moved beyond simple power creep, where new characters are just stronger than the old ones. This is solution creep, where the new characters are presented as the necessary answer to a problem that was designed from the ground up for them to solve. And at the end of the day, the intense reaction to Stygian Onslaught isn't really about Stygian Onslaught itself. It is not about the health pool of the one boss or how one weapon skin looks. It is a reaction to a perceived trajectory. It represents a flashpoint, a moment where for a significant portion of the community, the game's business model feels like it has finally and transparently eclipsed its design philosophy of player enjoyment. The incredible passion you see in these discussions, the frustrations, the detailed analysis, it doesn't come from a place of hating the game. It comes from a complete opposite. It comes from 5 years of deep investment, not just of money but of time, and of genuine emotional attachment to the world of Teyvat and its characters. But the question this new endgame forces players to to ask is whether that investment will continue to be respected. When achievements are temporary and new challenges feel like advertisements for the next banner, it is a fair question to ask. The developers now have an enormous amount of feedback to consider. The path they take from here will be telling. I do have a feeling that most of us already know the answer though, but I am curious to read your thoughts. Setting aside the frustrations for a moment, what does a perfect endgame actually look like to you in a game like this? What would a system that respects both players and the business look like? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, but that is all from me, 𝗖cie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗵𝘁, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!
Everybody. Okay. We love
Bullshit.
Chinese,
Bullshit.
Indians,
Bullshit.
white,
Bullshit.
and even nigger.
Whoa!